A billionaire saw a homeless girl teaching street kids, and what he did next shocked the entire city to its core. What began as a chance encounter in the forgotten district would spiral into a controversy that rocked the foundations of his empire. The homeless teacher had something his billions couldn't buy, and his response would leave everyone in disbelief. No one expected what happened next, especially not the city's elite who thought they knew everything about the cold-hearted billionaire. Maxwell Pierce was accustomed to controlling everything in his life. His $47 billion tech empire ran with mechanical precision, just like the Swiss watches he collected. But on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, his driver called in sick, his backup car broke down, and his phone died. A perfect storm that stranded the billionaire in the city's most neglected district. Seeking shelter under a crumbling overpass, Maxwell noticed something unusual. A young woman, early 20s, worn clothes, clearly homeless, was surrounded by a dozen children of various ages. But they weren't just huddled for warmth. She was teaching them. "What's 7 times 8? The girl asked, writing with a small piece of chalk on a flattened cardboard box. Maxwell watched in disbelief as the children competed to answer, their enthusiasm defying their circumstances. The billionaire who built his fortune on educational technology stood frozen, unable to reconcile what he was seeing. These children, dirty, hungry, forgotten, were grasping advanced concepts that his million-dollar software struggled to teach privileged kids in private schools. "Miss Lily, I got it." A small boy, no more than 7, stepped forward and not only answered the multiplication problem, but explained his mental process, a technique Maxwell had never seen before. The girl, Lily, beamed with pride, her smile illuminating the dreary underpass more effectively than the city's broken streetlights ever could. But what Maxwell saw in those children's eyes wasn't just intelligence. It was something he'd lost long ago, and he couldn't simply walk away. For the next 3 weeks, Maxwell Pierce became a ghost in his own company. His executive assistant fielded concerned calls from the board, while he claimed to be working on a revolutionary new project. Not entirely a lie. Every afternoon, he would park his newly purchased inconspicuous sedan 2 blocks away and watch Lily's makeshift classroom from behind the pages of a newspaper. "She shouldn't be able to do this," he muttered to himself on the 5th day as he witnessed Lily teach fractions using torn pieces of cardboard. The children grasped the concept within minutes, a stark contrast to the millions he'd spent developing adaptive learning algorithms that achieved poorer results. His phone buzzed constantly. Acquisition offers needed responses. Quarterly projections required approval. A senator was waiting for his campaign contribution. Yet Maxwell found himself drawn back to the underpass, watching as Lily somehow managed to create structure, discipline, and genuine curiosity with nothing but her voice and found materials. On day 12, one of the older girls, perhaps 13, solved an algebraic equation that would challenge most high school seniors. Maxwell nearly revealed himself when he instinctively leaned forward in amazement. The girl had used a method he'd never seen before, elegant in its simplicity. His company's educational platform, valued at $8.3 billion, suddenly felt clumsy and over-engineered. By the 3rd week, his obsession had become impossible to hide. His executive team was in near revolt. 3 board members had called emergency meetings. His absence from a major tech conference had sparked rumors of illness or burnout. The stock had dipped 3.4%. None of it mattered. Maxwell had made his decision. On a crisp Thursday morning, he stepped out of the shadows and approached Lily directly. A check already written for a sum that could change her life forever. "I'd like to help you and these children," he said simply, extending the check. Lily looked at the paper, then up at the billionaire whose face she recognized from magazine covers. Her response was not what he expected. What Maxwell didn't realize was that his billions couldn't buy what these children had, and his next move would shock even his closest advisors. No. The word hung in the air between them. Maxwell Pierce blinked twice, certain he had misheard. Nobody said no to him, not venture capitalists, not world leaders, and certainly not homeless teachers with nothing to their name. "I'm sorry?" he asked, the check still extended between them, the morning sunlight catching on the embossed logo of his private bank. Lily stood up, placing herself protectively between the billionaire and her students. The movement was subtle but deliberate, like a mother wolf positioning herself between her cubs and a potential threat. "I said no, Mr. Pierce. We don't need your money." A small murmur ran through the children. One of them, a thin boy with bright eyes and a too large sweater, tugged at Lily's worn jacket, whispering something about being hungry. She placed a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder without breaking eye contact with Maxwell. "These kids need stable homes, consistent meals, and a real classroom," Maxwell argued, his voice rising slightly. He gestured to their surroundings, the damp concrete, the makeshift cardboard desks, the constant drip of water from a leaking pipe overhead. "I can provide all of that, immediately. By this afternoon, they could be in warm beds with full stomachs." Lily's expression hardened, her jaw setting in a way that reminded Maxwell of his own reflection before closing billion-dollar deals. And what happens when you lose interest in your charity project? When the PR value diminishes? When your board questions why you're spending millions on street kids instead of shareholders? Maxwell felt his face flush. In 23 years of business, through hostile takeovers and congressional hearings, he'd never felt so transparent, so easily read. He wasn't accustomed to being decoded so accurately by strangers, especially not one wearing second-hand clothes. "You don't understand," he pressed, lowering his voice to what his negotiation coach called his sincerity register. "I've been watching you teach. Your methods, they're revolutionary. The way you explain complex concepts, the techniques you've developed. I want to help scale this. My educational platform reaches millions of children. Together, we could..." "Scale?" Lily laughed, the sound echoing under the concrete overpass, bouncing off the graffiti-covered pillars. "That's the problem, Mr. Pierce. You see these children as a business opportunity, a problem to solve with your billions, a data set to optimize. But they're not data points or potential consumers or future users of Max Learn Pro." The children watched the exchange with wide eyes, instinctively gathering closer to Lily. A girl of about 10. Maxwell had heard Lily call her May during a particularly impressive geometry lesson. Slipped her hand into Lily's. Another boy positioned himself slightly in front of his younger brother. "Then what do you want?" Maxwell demanded, frustration evident in his voice. His Italian leather shoes shifted uncomfortably on the damp ground. "Name it. A building, a foundation, a school with your name on it. I can make any of it happen before the weekend." Lily's answer was simple. "For you to see them as human beings first, not projects, not investments, not even charity cases." She gestured toward the children. "This is Marcus. He can multiply 3-digit numbers in his head, but he's been rejected by 3 foster homes because he wets the bed when he's anxious. That's May. She taught herself English by reading discarded newspapers, and she helps her grandmother collect recyclables every night until 2 a.m. And Darius there. He walks 3 miles each way to be here because this is the only place where someone believes he's smart." Maxwell's eyes moved from child to child as she spoke, really seeing them individually for perhaps the first time. Your money, Lily continued, her voice softening slightly. It creates dependencies. It builds systems around you as the benefactor. It doesn't solve the real problems. The broken foster care system, the mental health crisis, the structural poverty that put these brilliant children under a bridge instead of in gifted programs. She turned away, returning to her makeshift classroom, effectively dismissing the billionaire who could buy and sell the entire city block without noticing the expense. Today we're continuing with prime numbers, she announced to the children, as if the conversation with Maxwell had never happened. Who remembers why they're special? Several hands shot up, eager faces completely forgetting the billionaire still standing at the edge of their circle. Maxwell stood frozen, the uncashed check still in his hand. The amount, 7 figures easily, suddenly seemed insignificant, almost insulting in its simplicity. For the first time in decades, he felt something unfamiliar stirring within him. The uncomfortable realization that his money might be worthless in solving the problem before him. He watched as Lily drew a number line on the cardboard with practiced precision. Her methods unlike anything in his company's curriculum. The children leaned forward, engaged in a way that his software engineers had tried and failed to replicate with gamification and reward systems. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Lily glanced up, clearly surprised he was still there. May I observe? Just for today?" he asked, removing his cashmere coat and folding it over his arm. A long moment passed before Lily nodded once, gesturing to an empty spot at the edge of their circle. Maxwell Pierce, CEO of Max Tech Industries and the 14th richest person in the world, sat down cross-legged on the damp concrete, pulled out a notebook from his breast pocket, and began to take notes. That night, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Maxwell paced until dawn, his mind racing with possibilities that had nothing to do with stock prices or market share. By morning, he had made a decision that would upend his life and shock the business world. His assistant found his resignation letter on her desk at 6 a.m., along with instructions to liquidate significant personal assets immediately. By noon, Billionaire Gone Rogue was trending nationwide, and Maxwell Pierce had disappeared completely from public view. Though, if anyone had thought to look under a certain downtown overpass, they might have spotted him, sleeves rolled up, helping to arrange a more permanent solution to the leaking pipe overhead. 3 months later, the abandoned Westfield manufacturing building on 43rd Street had undergone a metamorphosis. The crumbling brick facade remained deliberately unchanged. Maxwell had insisted on it. But inside, something extraordinary was taking shape. "I still think the sign should say something," Maxwell grumbled, hauling a box of textbooks through the freshly painted hallway. His once manicured hands were calloused now, his designer wardrobe replaced with practical work clothes stained with paint and plaster dust. A streak of blue paint marked his left cheek, evidence of yesterday's work on the science lab walls. Lily smiled as she arranged desks in what had once been the factory floor. "No signs, no names, no press. That was our agreement, remember?" She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her movements efficient from years of making do with limited resources. The Pierce Academy for Gifted Children had been his first instinct, old habits of ego and branding dying hard. Then he'd suggested Pierce Harmon Learning Center, attempting to share the spotlight. But Lily had been adamant. No names, no publicity, no tax write-offs, and most importantly, no board of directors who could change course after Maxwell moved on. to his next project. The Community Learning Center was the compromise they'd reached, though even that modest sign hadn't been installed yet. The building remained anonymous from the outside, just another reclaimed industrial space in a neighborhood full of them. "Marcus, those books go in room 3. Lily called out to the boy, who was now officially her teaching assistant. At 13, he'd shown such aptitude for mathematics that he was already helping develop curriculum for the younger students. His nightmares had subsided since Maxwell had found him stable housing with a retired teacher who lived 3 blocks away. The center had grown beyond their original group of 12. Word had spread through invisible networks that connected the city's forgotten children. Whispers in shelters, murmurs at free lunch programs, quiet conversations in the back of public buses. They now had 47 regular students, ranging from 5 to 17, and a waiting list that grew weekly. "Mr. Pierce, there's someone at the door," called May, who had appointed herself as unofficial receptionist when she wasn't studying. Her grandmother now worked in the center's kitchen, preparing nutritious meals with ingredients from the rooftop garden they'd established. The elderly woman's arthritis had improved dramatically since Maxwell had quietly arranged for proper medical care. Maxwell looked up to see a familiar face. His former CFO, Patricia Wells, standing awkwardly in the entrance, her designer suit and immaculate bob, comically out of place among the simple furnishings and organized chaos of the learning center. "Max," she said, stepping carefully around a stack of science equipment waiting to be installed. Her stiletto heels clicked sharply against the polished concrete floor. "The board is making another offer. Double your previous salary. Full creative control of any division you want. They're desperate." Maxwell continued unpacking books, not bothering to look up. He recognized the titles, classic literature he'd ordered to supplement the mathematics and science texts. "Tell them what you told them last time, Patty." Patricia sighed, her perfectly manicured fingers fidgeting with the clasp of her leather portfolio. "I did. But the stock is down 18% since you left. The educational division is floundering without you. The new CEO is talking about selling it off to Pearson or McGraw-Hill." For a brief moment, Maxwell felt a twinge of pride. His absence was being felt. 3 months ago, that knowledge would have satisfied something deep within him. Some need to be indispensable, to be the irreplaceable genius. Then he caught Lily watching him from across the room, her expression unreadable but somehow knowing, as if she could see the momentary ego flare within him. "Actually," he said, straightening up and brushing dust from his hands, "tell them I have a different proposal." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "You're coming back?" "No," Maxwell said firmly. "But I'd like to schedule a meeting, just the major shareholders and me." "Max," Patricia began, but was interrupted by a small commotion at the door. Darius, the boy who had once walked 3 miles each way to attend Lily's lessons under the bridge, burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Pierce, I got it working." In his hands was a small robot assembled from parts Maxwell had salvaged from the Max Tech laboratories before his departure, equipment that would have been discarded during the quarterly inventory purge. "Show me," Maxwell said, immediately forgetting about Patricia, the board, and the stock price. He knelt beside Darius as the boy placed the robot on the floor and pressed a sequence of buttons on a makeshift remote control. The robot lurched forward, turned in a wobbly circle, then projected a simple holographic image, a 3-dimensional geometric shape that rotated slowly in the air above it. "I fixed the projection matrix like you showed me," Darius said proudly, "and I added a subroutine to stabilize the image." Patricia watched in stunned silence as Maxwell high-fived the boy. their conversation devolving into technical jargon she couldn't follow despite her Harvard MBA. She had never seen her former boss this animated, this genuinely engaged, not even when closing nine-figure deals. "I'll tell the board you'll be in touch," she said finally, turning to leave. Maxwell barely noticed her departure. That evening, after the children had gone home, some to foster homes, others to shelters, a few to apartments where Maxwell now quietly paid the rent, he and Lily sat on the rooftop garden they'd built together. The raised beds were already producing herbs and early vegetables, tended by students learning about biology and nutrition simultaneously. "You're going back," she said, handing him a mug of tea. It wasn't a question. Maxwell shook his head, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in gold. The Max Tech Tower dominated the view, its glass exterior reflecting the dying light. Once, he'd felt a surge of pride every time he saw it. Now it seemed strangely distant, like a relic from someone else's life. "No, but I am going to buy back the educational division, as a private entity, separate from Max Tech." Lily raised an eyebrow, blowing gently on her tea. "With what money? You've liquidated almost everything for this place." She gestured around them at the learning center that had consumed most of his liquid assets. Maxwell smiled, the expression softening the lines that had begun to fade from his face over the past months. "I still have some resources. My patents. My original shares in 3 startups that went public last year. And some very interested private investors who believe in what we're doing here. And then?" "And then," Maxwell said, his voice growing animated, setting his mug down on the reclaimed wood table they'd built together. "We revolutionize it. We implement your methods. The adaptive learning techniques you developed with nothing but intuition and necessity. We make the platform available to every public school in the country at cost. No profit margins, no shareholder value to protect, no artificial barriers to access." He leaned forward, eyes bright with the same intensity that had once built a tech empire. "The research we're doing here, combining your teaching methods with appropriate technology, it could change everything, Lily. Not just for these kids, but for millions of others." Lily was silent for a long moment, watching a pair of urban hawks circling in the distance. "They'll call you insane, you know, throwing away billions in potential profit. Your business school probably already uses you as a cautionary tale." Maxwell laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "Probably. But I've discovered something interesting about money, Lily." "What's that?" He gestured toward the learning center below them, where children who had once been invisible had found not just education, but belonging. Where Marcus no longer had nightmares, where May's grandmother could afford her medication, where Darius was building robots instead of wondering where his next meal would come from. "It's a terrible way to keep score." Lily smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his paint-stained hand briefly. "So, what's your timeline for this educational revolution?" Maxwell pulled a notebook from his back pocket, not the sleek digital tablet he'd once carried, but an actual paper notebook, its edges worn from constant use. He flipped it open to reveal pages of diagrams, calculations, and notes in his increasingly messy handwriting. "I've been working on the proposal for weeks. The initial platform could be ready within 6 months. Full implementation in public schools would take longer, bureaucracy, training, infrastructure challenges. But we could have pilot programs in the 20 most underserved districts by next fall." He turned another page, revealing more detailed plans. "I've been talking with some former colleagues, engineers who left Max Tech because they wanted to build something meaningful, not just profitable. They're willing to work for significantly reduced salaries if the end product remains accessible to all. Lily leaned closer, examining his notes with the critical eye of an educator who had spent years making miracles from scraps. "This part here," she said, pointing to a section on assessment methodology. "It's still too rigid. Children don't learn in straight lines." Maxwell immediately grabbed a pencil, crossing out his original design and sketching a new approach based on her feedback. There was no defensiveness, no ego, just the collaborative spirit of two people who had found unexpected common ground in their shared mission. They worked late into the night, the city lights twinkling below them as they refined the blueprint for what would eventually become the most significant disruption in educational technology in decades. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Maxwell Pierce, former billionaire, current teacher's assistant, future educational revolutionary, felt something he hadn't experienced since building his first computer in his parents' garage: purpose. The sensation was intoxicating in its clarity. The constant background noise that had accompanied his rise to wealth and power, the anxiety about competitors, the obsession with market share, the endless pursuit of more, had been replaced by a singular focus that brought with it an unexpected peace. In the coming weeks, his proposal would send shockwaves through the business world. Former colleagues would publicly question his sanity. Financial analysts would write scathing critiques of his destruction of shareholder value. His portrait would be removed from the MaxTech lobby, his name gradually erased from the company he had built. And Maxwell Pierce, for the first time in his adult life, wouldn't care at all. Because every morning, 47 children, soon to be many more, would walk through the doors of an unmarked building on 43rd Street, where they would be seen not as statistics or test scores or future consumers, but as human beings with limitless potential. And somewhere in the boardrooms of Wall Street, a tremor of change was beginning that would eventually grow into an earthquake. The first tiny cracks were already forming in the foundations of a system built on the premise that profit must always come first. Cracks that would one day bring the entire structure tumbling down, making way for something new and previously unimaginable to rise in its place. 6 months into the transformation of the Westfield building, Maxwell Pierce stood before the MaxTech board of directors, a room full of people who had once hung on his every word. Today, they regarded him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. The mahogany boardroom table gleamed under recessed lighting, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city Maxwell had once viewed as his personal empire. "Let me get this straight," said Richard Hargrove, the silver-haired chairman who had replaced Maxwell. He leaned forward, manicured fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You want to buy back the educational division, which represents nearly 15% of our total valuation, to turn it into a non-profit entity." Maxwell nodded, standing confidently in his simple button-down shirt and jeans. No power suit, no Italian leather shoes, none of the armor he'd once believed essential to these battles. The calluses on his hands from actual physical labor were visible as he gestured, a detail not lost on several board members who exchanged glances. "That's correct. At market value, with financing already secured." His voice carried the same authority it always had, though the edge of impatience that had once characterized his presentations was noticeably absent. Murmurs rippled through the room. Patricia Wells, still serving as CFO, kept her expression carefully neutral, though Maxwell caught the slight upward twitch at the corner of her mouth. They had worked together for 15 years. She knew a winning strategy when she saw one, even if her colleagues didn't yet. And you intend to give away the technology? The same technology we've invested billions developing. This came from Eliza Winters, the sharp-eyed venture capitalist who had been one of Maxwell's earliest investors. Her tone wasn't entirely antagonistic. There was curiosity there too, the instinct that had made her successful at identifying disruptive opportunities. Not give away, Maxwell corrected. Make accessible. There's a difference. He moved away from the head of the table where he had instinctively positioned himself. Old habits. And instead walked toward the large display screen on the wall. He tapped his tablet, projecting a series of charts onto the main screen. The data visualization had the clean, elegant aesthetic that had made Max Tech products instantly recognizable worldwide. Current market penetration of Max Learn is limited to districts with significant resources. My proposal extends it to all schools, with a sliding scale payment model based on district funding levels. His finger traced the projected growth curve. The wealthiest districts continue paying premium prices. Middle-tier districts pay reduced rates. The most underserved communities access the platform at nominal cost. This is absurd, snapped Jonathan Blake, the newest board member, a hedge fund manager known for his ruthless profit maximization strategies. His perfectly tailored suit seemed to tighten around him as he leaned forward aggressively. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to maximize returns, not indulge your midlife crisis charity project. Several board members nodded in agreement, though Maxwell noted that the older members, those who had been with him since the early days, seemed less convinced by Blake's argument. Maxwell smiled, unfazed by the barb. 6 months ago, it would have cut deep, challenging his very identity. Now it barely registered. Working alongside Lily had given him an immunity to the kind of status anxiety that drove most of his former peers. I anticipated that reaction, he said calmly, changing the projection to a different set of data. Which is why I've prepared this analysis. The room fell silent as the board members examined the figures. Even Blake stopped tapping his pen impatiently. These are projected adoption rates under the current model versus my proposed approach, Maxwell explained. Yes, the per-unit profit is lower, but the total market reach increases by a factor of 7. Even at reduced margins, the overall revenue stream stabilizes and grows more predictable. He changed slides again. And here's the part I think you'll find most interesting. Long-term brand loyalty and ecosystem integration. The new slide showed a complex web of connections between educational outcomes and future technology adoption patterns. Students who learn on Max Tech platforms become adults who choose Max Tech products. This isn't speculation. We have 20 years of data supporting this correlation. By expanding our educational reach now, we're essentially securing market share for the next 3 decades. Maxwell clicked to another slide showing global education trends. Furthermore, international markets are increasingly prioritizing educational outcomes over shareholder returns. The countries with the highest performing educational systems are all moving toward models that prioritize access. If Max Tech doesn't adapt to this reality, we'll be left behind as competitors capture these emerging markets. He paused, letting the implication sink in. This isn't charity. It's long-term strategic positioning. By the time Maxwell finished his presentation, the mood in the room had shifted. Even Jonathan Blake was leaning forward, eyes narrowed in calculation rather than dismissal. Maxwell recognized the look. Blake was trying to figure out how to take credit for the idea if it succeeded. "We'll need to discuss this privately," Hargrove said finally, removing his glasses and polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. "The proposal has, Merit. Maxwell nodded, gathering his materials with unhurried movements. Of course, I'll wait outside. In the hallway of the building he had once ruled, Maxwell felt strangely detached. The familiar hum of activity, the deferential nods from passing employees who still recognized him. It all seemed like artifacts from another life. He noticed details he'd overlooked during his tenure. The strained expressions of junior staff working late. The subtle hierarchies evident in everything from office placement to coffee mug quality. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Emergency at center. Darius's project exploded. Minor fire, all safe. Come when you can. Maxwell smiled, feeling a pull toward the learning center that far outweighed whatever happened in the boardroom behind him. There, at least, problems had straightforward solutions. Broken circuits could be fixed, burned components replaced. The politics of corporate power were infinitely messier. He was composing a reply when the boardroom door opened. Patricia emerged first, followed by Hargrove and the others. "We have a counter-proposal," Hargrove announced, gesturing for Maxwell to rejoin them inside. For the next 2 hours, they negotiated terms. Maxwell held firm on the core principles while conceding on implementation details. He watched Blake carefully, noting how the man's opposition gradually transformed into attempts to reshape the proposal to his own advantage. "What if we structure it as a separate benefit corporation?" Blake suggested eventually. Max Tech retains majority ownership, but establishes governance that legally mandates the social mission. We get the PR benefits while maintaining control of the intellectual property. And what happens when the next quarterly report shows decreased profit margins in that division? Maxwell countered. Blake smiled thinly. We emphasize the long-term strategic value to investors. The market will adjust its expectations if we frame it correctly. Maxwell considered this. Blake was essentially proposing to use the language and structure of social enterprise while preserving the underlying profit motive. It wasn't ideal, but it might be the wedge needed to create real change from within. "I could accept that structure," Maxwell said carefully, "with specific binding commitments on accessibility metrics and pricing caps for underserved communities. And board representation for educational experts without financial stakes in the company," he added, thinking of Lily and her uncompromising standards. 3 hours later, Maxwell walked out of Max Tech Tower with a signed agreement. Not everything he wanted, but enough to begin. The educational division would remain part of Max Tech, but with a new public benefit corporation structure that prioritized access over maximum profit. Maxwell would serve as an advisor, but not rejoin the company. Most importantly, a significant portion of the technology would be made available to public schools at rates they could actually afford. It wasn't the clean break he'd envisioned, but it was a foot in the door of systemic change. And sometimes, as Lily had taught him, progress came in increments rather than revolutions. As he stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent decades in that building, pursuing goals that had seemed essential at the time. Now he understood they had been largely arbitrary. Metrics of success defined by others, accepted without question. His driver waited at the curb, another remnant of his former life he hadn't quite relinquished. "The learning center, sir?" the man asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, Thomas. And I think we can take the regular streets today. No need to rush." As they drove through the city, Maxwell observed neighborhoods changing around them. Gentrification pushing outward from the center, economic disparities visible in the shifting storefronts and building conditions. He had lived in this city his entire adult life without really seeing it. traveling from one privileged enclave to another without engaging with the spaces between. When they arrived at the learning center, the smell of smoke still lingered in the air. A small crowd of children gathered around the entrance, excitement rather than fear animating their conversations. Maxwell spotted Marcus organizing the younger ones, clipboard in hand, as he conducted what appeared to be a safety drill. Inside, Lily was directing cleanup efforts, her calm efficiency keeping the minor crisis from disrupting the day's activities. Most classes had resumed in unaffected areas, though a section of the main workspace was cordoned off with yellow caution tape. Darius sat dejectedly in the corner, his robot project a melted mess on a workbench. His shoulders were hunched, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment. "I miscalculated the power requirements," the boy explained when Maxwell approached, not meeting his eyes. "I thought I could make it faster by overclocking the processor, but..." He gestured helplessly at the charred remains. "I should have tested it in smaller increments like you said." Maxwell pulled up a chair beside him, examining the damage. The main circuit board was beyond salvage, its components fused together in a blackened mass. The chassis had partially melted on one side, and the delicate servo motors that had controlled the robot's movements were warped beyond repair. "You know who else melted their first prototype?" "Me." Darius looked up, skepticism clear on his face. "Really? Really? Caught my parents' garage on fire when I was 16. My dad grounded me for a month." Maxwell picked up a partially melted circuit board, turning it over in his hands. "I was trying to build a more efficient power supply for my computer, miscalculated the resistance in a similar way." "What happened?" Darius asked, his curiosity temporarily overcoming his disappointment. "Smoke everywhere. Alarm went off. Fire department came." Maxwell chuckled at the memory. "My mother didn't let me back in the garage for 6 weeks. Had to rebuild the whole thing on my high school's electronics lab bench, staying late after everyone else had gone home." He set the damaged component down gently. "The difference is, I had resources to try again. And now, so do you." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in anti-static material. "I had a feeling you'd need this soon. It's the new XR7 microprocessor, not even on the market yet." Darius's eyes widened as Maxwell unwrapped the chip, revealing its intricate architecture. "But how did you..." "I still know a few people," Maxwell said with a wink. "Now, let's talk about heat dissipation strategies." For the next hour, they sketched designs for a cooling system that would prevent future meltdowns. Maxwell guided rather than dictated, asking questions that led Darius to discover solutions himself. The boys' initial dejection transformed into renewed determination as they worked. "What if we added a thermal cutoff switch here?" Darius suggested, pointing to a spot on their diagram. "Good thinking," Maxwell nodded. "And what would trigger it?" "A thermistor monitoring the processor temperature. If it exceeds safe levels, power automatically reduces until temperatures normalize." "Exactly. You're learning from your mistake. That's what makes a real engineer." Across the room, Lily watched the exchange with a small smile. When Maxwell had first appeared under her bridge, she'd seen only the arrogant billionaire, the man who thought money could solve everything. Now she saw someone else entirely, a mentor, a partner in their unlikely enterprise. And perhaps, though neither of them had acknowledged it yet, something more. She approached them, carrying a tray with 3 mugs of tea. "How's the resurrection going?" "We're designing version 2.0, Darius said, his enthusiasm fully restored. "It's going to be even better than the first one." "Failure as opportunity." Lily nodded approvingly. A concept worth learning early. Maxwell accepted the tea gratefully. How did the board meeting go? Lily asked quietly, as Darius became absorbed in refining their sketch. Compromise, Maxwell replied. Not everything we wanted, but a start. That's usually how change happens, Lily said, rarely all at once. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. Marcus appeared, slightly breathless. Mr. Pierce, there's someone here asking for you. Says he's from Max Tech. Maxwell and Lily exchanged glances. Did he give a name? Blake, Jonathan Blake. He's wearing a really expensive suit. Maxwell's expression hardened slightly. I'll handle this. Outside the center, a sleek black car idled at the curb. Jonathan Blake stood on the sidewalk, adjusting his $1,000 suit as he surveyed the nondescript building with narrowed eyes. His driver remained at attention beside the vehicle, scanning the neighborhood with poorly concealed disdain. So, this is where Pierce has been hiding, Blake murmured to himself. Interesting. He nodded to his driver. Wait here. This won't take long. As Blake approached the entrance, Maxwell emerged, deliberately closing the door behind him. Whatever Blake wanted, Maxwell preferred to keep it separate from the learning center. Jonathan, this is unexpected. Blake smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. I thought I'd see this operation for myself. Quite a step down from the corner office, isn't it? Maxwell shrugged. Depends on how you measure such things. Blake glanced around, taking in the modest surroundings. The board approved your proposal, against my recommendation. I wanted to understand what's driving this transformation. You could have called. Some things are better assessed in person. Blake straightened his already immaculate tie. I've been researching your little project here. Impressive results with these children, I'll admit. But surely you see the limitations of this approach? You're helping what? 50 kids. Max Tech influences millions. That's precisely why I'm working to change Max Tech's approach, Maxwell replied evenly. The models we develop here can scale. Blake took a step closer, lowering his voice. Let me be direct, Pierce. I think you're having some sort of crisis. It happens to men your age. But you've built something valuable at Max Tech. And I won't let you dismantle it for some misguided social experiment. The agreement is signed, Jonathan. Agreements can be reinterpreted. Priorities shift. Blake's smile returned, sharper now. The board respects you, but they'll follow whoever delivers results. 3/4 of declining profits, and they'll be looking for alternatives to your vision. Maxwell recognized the threat for what it was. Blake intended to sabotage the new direction, forcing a return to the pure profit model. It was exactly what Maxwell would have done himself, not so long ago. You're welcome to try, Maxwell said calmly. But I think you'll find that the landscape is changing. Consumers, employees, even investors are demanding more than just financial returns. Temporary trends, Blake dismissed with a wave of his hand. The market always reverts to fundamentals. Perhaps. Or perhaps what constitutes fundamentals is itself evolving. Their conversation was interrupted as the learning center door opened. Lily stepped out, her expression carefully neutral, but her posture protective. Everything okay out here, Max? Blake's eyes shifted to Lily, assessing her with the same calculating gaze he applied to balance sheets and acquisition targets. Ah, the famous Miss Harmon, the teacher who converted the tech titan. Lily met his gaze steadily. Mr. Blake, I presume? I've heard about you. All good things, I'm sure, Blake replied with practiced charm. Actually, no. Lily's directness seemed to catch Blake off guard. But I try not to judge people solely by their reputation. Blake recovered quickly. Admirable. I was just telling Maxwell here that while your work is touching, it's ultimately inefficient. The resources he's pouring into this facility could be deployed more effectively through traditional philanthropic channels. Effectiveness depends on your metrics, Lily countered. If you're measuring lives changed rather than dollars generated, we're doing quite well. Inside, unaware of the power struggle unfolding on the sidewalk, Darius continued refining his robot design, already planning improvements that would make the next version more resilient, more adaptable, more capable of navigating a complex world. The confrontation outside was just the beginning. In the months to come, Blake would emerge as the principal antagonist to Maxwell's vision, working tirelessly to undermine the new direction from within MaxTech. But Maxwell had anticipated this, had counted on it even. Because opposition created definition, forced clarification, and ultimately strengthened resolve. As Blake finally departed with a thinly veiled warning about keeping options open, Maxwell turned to Lily. "He'll be trouble," she observed. "Yes," Maxwell agreed. "But trouble is often where the most interesting possibilities emerge." They returned inside to where the real work continued. The daily, unglamorous labor of building something new and durable in a world designed to resist fundamental change. Darius looked up from his workbench, holding up the revised design with pride. "I think we've solved the overheating problem," he announced. Maxwell smiled, the earlier confrontation already fading from his mind as he focused on what truly mattered. "Let's build it and find out." In the gathering dusk outside, Blake's car pulled away from the curb, but the man himself was already on his phone, setting in motion plans that would test Maxwell's newfound purpose in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The real battle was just beginning, a contest not just for the future of MaxTech, but for the very definition of success in a world desperate for new models and metrics. Inside the Learning Center, Maxwell and Darius bent over their work, already designing a better, stronger version of what had been lost. The first of many lessons about failure, resilience, and the endless possibility of beginning again. "I don't understand why we need outside investors at all," Lily said, spreading financial documents across Maxwell's desk. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Blake, and the Learning Center had continued to flourish despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges they faced. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Maxwell sighed, rubbing his temples where the first threads of silver had begun to appear in his dark hair. "Because we're reaching capacity here, and the next phase requires more resources than I currently have available." The truth was more complicated. While Maxwell had indeed liquidated substantial assets to fund the center, he wasn't completely without means. But Blake's countermoves at MaxTech had been effective, tying up Maxwell's remaining holdings in legal challenges and freezing the implementation of their educational access agreement. The corporate machinery Maxwell had once commanded was now being wielded against him with surgical precision. "What about your MaxTech shares?" Lily asked, echoing his thoughts. Her fingers traced the edge of a spreadsheet showing their projected expenses for the coming year, a steady upward curve that outpaced their available funding. "Currently in litigation. Blake convinced enough board members that my mental state at the time of resignation rendered our agreement questionable." Maxwell's tone was matter-of-fact, though the betrayal still stung. "It could be years before that's resolved." He didn't add that his legal team had warned him to prepare for the possibility of losing entirely. Blake had methodically gathered affidavits from former colleagues testifying to Maxwell's erratic behavior and concerning decisions in the months before his departure. Context removed, his transformation looked suspiciously like a breakdown. Lily frowned, studying the projections before them. The Learning Center now served over 70 children, with a waiting list 3 times that length. Their methods were proving extraordinarily effective. Students who had been written off by traditional schools were thriving, some advancing multiple grade levels in months. The data was undeniable, but data alone couldn't pay for expansion. "These investors," she said carefully, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How do we know they won't try to change what we're building here? Turn it into just another private school for the elite?" It was the question that had kept Maxwell awake for weeks. He'd seen it happen countless times in the tech world. Idealistic startups gradually morphing into the very institutions they had once criticized, all in the name of sustainability and scale. "We don't. Not with absolute certainty. But I've been very clear about our mission. The funding agreement explicitly protects our educational approach and commitment to accessibility." Lily didn't look convinced. Her skepticism had been hard-earned through years of watching well-intentioned reforms get diluted beyond recognition. "People like Blake always find loopholes?" "These aren't people like Blake," Maxwell assured her, though his own confidence wavered. In his previous life, he'd seen how quickly mission statements gave way to market pressures. They're impact investors. They measure success differently. "If you say so." Lily gathered the papers, her movements efficient but tinged with reluctance. "When do they arrive?" "Tomorrow. Just an initial tour and conversation. I'll make sure the students are prepared." She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the late afternoon light. "Maxwell, promise me we won't compromise on what matters." "I promise," he said, meaning it completely in that moment. After she left, Maxwell remained at his desk, reviewing the investor profiles one more time. Victoria Chen's fund had an impressive track record of supporting educational innovations while maintaining their core missions. Their portfolio included several alternative schools that had scaled successfully without sacrificing accessibility. On paper, they were ideal partners. But Maxwell had been in business long enough to know that paper rarely captured the full complexity of human motivations. Chen was still an investor, and investors expected returns, whether financial, social, or reputational. The question was whether those expectations would align with the center's purpose over the long term. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Robot team needs help with servo calibration. Lab 3. Maxwell welcomed the distraction. Working with the students always clarified his thinking, grounding abstract concerns in the concrete reality of young minds engaged in discovery. He headed to the robotics lab, where 4 students huddled around a partially assembled mechanical arm. "Mr. Pierce, perfect timing," Marcus called. At 15 now, he had grown several inches and developed a deeper voice. But his enthusiasm for problem-solving remained unchanged. "We can't get the fine motor control working properly." For the next hour, Maxwell lost himself in the satisfying puzzle of mechanical engineering, guiding the students through troubleshooting procedures without simply providing answers. By the time they resolved the issue, a subtle programming error in the feedback loop, his earlier anxieties had receded to manageable proportions. "Remember," he told the team as they celebrated their success, "most innovation happens through iteration. Expect problems, learn from them, and keep moving forward." It was advice he needed to follow himself. The next morning, Maxwell arrived early to prepare for the investors' visit. The center was already buzzing with activity. Lily had a gift for organization that complemented Maxwell's strategic thinking perfectly. Every classroom and lab space had been tidied without losing the authentic working atmosphere that made the center special. "Coffee's fresh," Lily said, appearing at his elbow with a steaming mug. "You look like you need it." "Didn't sleep much," Maxwell admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, a moment of connection that neither acknowledged explicitly. "Having second thoughts?" "Just running scenarios. Old habit from my corporate days." Lily studied him for a moment. "And what does your scenario analysis tell you?" "That we need the investment to continue what we've started here, and that every funding source comes with strings attached. The question is whether we can manage those strings without compromising our core purpose." "Well," Lily said with a small smile, "at least you're going into this with your eyes open." At precisely 10 o'clock, Maxwell greeted the delegation in the center's modest lobby. Victoria Chen led the group, a venture capitalist who had made her fortune in sustainable technology before turning to educational investment. She was smaller than Maxwell had expected from her formidable reputation, barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the room. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and evaluating. Behind her came 3 associates, each carrying tablets and notebooks, and to Maxwell's surprise, a familiar face. "Dr. Abernathy." Maxwell extended his hand to the distinguished older man, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." Dr. William Abernathy had been Maxwell's mentor at MIT decades ago, before academic research gave way to the lure of entrepreneurship. The professor's smile was warm, though his eyes were evaluating. Age had whitened his hair and stooped his shoulders slightly, but his mind remained razor-sharp. "When Victoria mentioned she was visiting your project, I insisted on coming along. Had to see for myself what drew you away from the empire you built." The tour proceeded smoothly. Maxwell had deliberately scheduled it during normal operations. No special presentations or rehearsed demonstrations. The investors moved through classrooms and workspaces, observing the organized chaos of genuine learning. In the mathematics lab, Marcus led a group of younger students through an innovative approach to geometry using physical models and digital simulations simultaneously. The traditional boundaries between concrete and abstract learning dissolved as children moved seamlessly between manipulating actual objects and exploring their virtual representations. This integration of tactile and digital learning environments is fascinating, Chen observed, watching a 9-year-old girl construct a complex polyhedron. Most EdTech either ignores physical interaction entirely or treats it as separate from digital engagement. We've found that the most powerful learning happens at the intersection, Maxwell explained. The technology enhances physical exploration rather than replacing it. In the Language Arts Studio, May was directing a multilingual storytelling project that incorporated students' diverse cultural backgrounds. Children who had once been penalized for their home languages were now leveraging them as assets, developing sophisticated understandings of linguistic structures while strengthening their English skills contextually. "My grandmother helps with the Chinese characters," May explained proudly to Chen, who responded in fluent Mandarin. The two conversed briefly, May's expression lighting up at being understood in her first language. Victoria Chen took copious notes, occasionally asking incisive questions about methodology and outcomes. Her associates filmed portions of the tour on tablets, with permission from students whose guardians had signed releases. One associate in particular, a sharp-featured man named Elliot, seemed especially interested in the center's infrastructure. The building itself, the technology systems, the physical assets. His questions focused less on educational approaches and more on quantifiable resources. "Your metrics are impressive," Chen said during a break in the center's small cafeteria, where students from the culinary program had prepared a simple but elegant lunch of fresh salads and homemade bread. "Especially the acceleration in mathematics comprehension. Have you considered how this would scale in different environments?" "We're documenting everything," Maxwell explained, spreading out the center's assessment data. "The goal is to create a replicable model that can be adapted to various settings." "The question isn't just replication, though," Elliot interjected. "It's standardization. How do you ensure consistent outcomes across different implementations?" Maxwell noticed Lily tense slightly beside him. Standardization was precisely what their approach challenged. The notion that all children should progress through identical learning sequences at identical paces. "We don't aim for standardization in the traditional sense," Lily explained carefully. "Our framework adapts to individual learning profiles while maintaining high expectations for all students. The consistency comes from the process, not from forcing identical outcomes." Elliot made a note, his expression non-committal. "Interesting approach. Challenging to scale, though." Dr. Abernathy, who had been largely silent during lunch, now spoke up. "The technology integration is seamless. But what happens when these children return to their regular lives? The digital divide remains a significant barrier." It was a legitimate concern, one they grappled with constantly. Many of their students had limited or no technology access outside the center. "That's why we've implemented the Evening Access program," Lily explained, joining them with a tray of refreshments prepared by the culinary skills class. "Families can use our facilities after hours, and we're working with community centers to establish satellite connections. We're also developing offline components for our digital tools," Maxwell added. "Students can download resources for use without internet access, then sync when they return to the center." The conversation continued, drilling into specifics of curriculum, assessment methods, and long-term sustainability. Maxwell found himself impressed by Chen's genuine understanding of educational challenges. Though her perspective remained that of an investor seeking returns, albeit social rather than purely financial. As they approached the robotics lab, Maxwell felt a surge of pride. This was where their approach truly shined, blending technical skills with creative problem-solving and collaboration. The space hummed with productive energy as students of various ages worked together on projects ranging from simple mechanical devices to complex autonomous systems. Inside, Darius was leading a demonstration of the improved robot he and Maxwell had rebuilt after the fire. It now moved with fluid precision, navigating an obstacle course while performing assigned tasks. The 13-year-old's confidence had grown exponentially over the past months. His natural aptitude for engineering nurtured by mentorship and resources he'd never had access to before. "This is remarkable," Chen said, watching as the robot sorted colored blocks according to a pattern it had been shown only once. "The adaptive learning algorithm?" "Developed right here," Maxwell confirmed. Darius wrote most of the code himself. Dr. Abernathy knelt beside the 13-year-old, his academic interest piqued. "May I ask how you approach the visual recognition problem? That's typically quite challenging." Darius launched into an explanation that would have been at home in a graduate-level computer science course, describing his hybrid approach that combined traditional image processing with a neural network he had trained on limited data. The professor listened intently, occasionally asking questions that pushed the boy to articulate his thinking more precisely. "I started with a convolutional neural network architecture," Darius explained. But I didn't have enough training data for reliable pattern recognition. So I implemented a pre-processing layer that extracts key features using more traditional computer vision techniques, then feeds those to a smaller neural network that can learn effectively from fewer examples. Extraordinary, Abernathy murmured to Maxwell as they moved on. That young man has more intuitive understanding of machine learning principles than most of my doctoral candidates. And he developed most of it through self-directed learning, Maxwell added quietly. Traditional schools had him classified as underperforming because he couldn't focus on standardized curriculum. The tour concluded in Maxwell's office, where financial projections and expansion plans were discussed in detail. Chen's team asked tough questions about sustainability, teacher recruitment, and potential regulatory challenges. Your current facility is nearly at capacity, Elliot noted, reviewing the enrollment data. And your waiting list continues to grow. What's your space acquisition strategy? We've identified several potential locations for a second center, Maxwell explained, pulling up a map on his tablet. Our priority is accessibility via public transportation and proximity to underserved communities. Have you considered a more centralized approach? Elliot suggested. One larger facility rather than multiple smaller ones? Economies of scale would be significant. We've found that smaller learning communities foster stronger relationships, Lily countered. The personal connections between students and educators are central to our model. The discussion continued for another hour, delving into financial models, governance structures, and growth trajectories. Throughout, Maxwell noticed a subtle tension between Chen's focus on educational impact and Elliot's emphasis on operational efficiency. I believe we can work together, Chen said finally, closing her portfolio with a decisive gesture. Your model aligns with our impact goals, and the preliminary results are compelling. We'd like to proceed with due diligence toward a potential investment. With certain conditions, added Elliot, the sharp-featured man who had said little during the tour, but whose questions had consistently probed for vulnerabilities. We'd need board representation and quarterly benchmarks. Maxwell felt Lily tense beside him. The educational approach remains under the direction of our teaching team, he said firmly. That's non-negotiable. Chen nodded, her expression thoughtful. Of course. We invest in models that work. We have no interest in disrupting your methods, only in helping them reach more students. We'll need to review any specific benchmarks carefully, Lily added. Traditional metrics often miss the most meaningful aspects of educational growth. Understood, Chen agreed. We can work together to develop appropriate assessment frameworks. Our goal is to support your vision, not redirect it. After the investors departed, promising to send a formal term sheet within days, Lily and Maxwell remained in the office, both lost in thought. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, the day's energy gradually settling into reflective quiet. They seemed genuinely impressed, Maxwell offered, loosening his tie. He'd worn one today for the first time in months, a concession to the formality of the meeting. Most of them did, Lily agreed, perching on the edge of his desk. Chen asks good questions. She seems to understand what we're trying to accomplish. But that Elliot person, something about him felt off. His questions weren't about education, they were about assets and control. Maxwell had noticed it too. The way Elliot had focused more on infrastructure and assets than on students or outcomes. We'll review their terms carefully before committing to anything. Later that evening, as most students and staff had gone home, Maxwell worked late finalizing curriculum materials for the coming week. The center was peaceful at this hour, the usual bustle replaced by a contemplative silence that allowed his thoughts to range freely. A soft knock at his door revealed Dr. Abernathy, who had apparently returned. The older man stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "William, I thought you'd left with the others." "I told them I wanted to see the neighborhood. In truth, I wanted to speak with you privately." The professor closed the door behind him, lowering his voice despite the empty hallways. "Maxwell, do you know who Elliot Chambers really is?" Maxwell frowned, setting aside the tablet he'd been working on. "One of Chen's investment analysts, I assumed." "He's Jonathan Blake's nephew, and a significant shareholder in MaxTech." The revelation hit Maxwell like a physical blow. "Are you certain?" Abernathy nodded grimly. "I recognized him from a fundraising event last year. He was introduced as Blake's protege." "And Chen doesn't know?" "I'm not sure, but I thought you should be aware." Abernathy settled into a chair, the weight of concern evident in his posture. "This place you've built, Maxwell, it's important, not just for these children, but as a model for what education could be. I'd hate to see it compromised." "Thank you for the warning," Maxwell said, mind already racing through implications and contingencies. After Abernathy left, Maxwell remained at his desk, staring at the investment proposal that had seemed so promising hours before. Now he saw potential traps in every clause. Ways Blake could gain influence over the center through Chen's investment. His phone chimed with a notification, breaking his reverie. A text message from Lily. "We need to talk. Not at the center. L." 20 minutes later, Maxwell met Lily at a small coffee shop several blocks away. The evening crowd had thinned, leaving the place quiet, enough for private conversation. Lily had claimed a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her expression grave as he joined her. "Blake was here," she said without preamble, "after you left. He came to my classroom." Maxwell's concern sharpened to alarm. What did he want? "To offer me a job, Director of Curriculum Development for MaxTech's new educational foundation. Triple my current salary, plus resources to implement my methods at scale." "And you said?" Lily gave him a look that made him regret the question immediately. "I told him I wasn't interested. But Maxwell, that's not the point. He's attacking from multiple angles now, trying to infiltrate through Chen's investment while simultaneously attempting to poach key personnel." Maxwell shared Abernathy's revelation about Elliot, watching Lily's expression darken further. "We need to warn Chen," she said. "If she doesn't already know," Maxwell cautioned. "This could be an elaborate play by Blake, using her as unwitting cover." "You think she's complicit?" Lily's eyes widened slightly. She seemed genuinely committed to educational equity. "I don't know," Maxwell admitted. "In my experience, people rarely fit neatly into hero or villain categories. Chen might believe in our mission while still being willing to compromise it in ways she considers reasonable." They sat in silence for a moment, the magnitude of their challenge settling between them. The Learning Center had always been vulnerable, financially precarious, dependent on Maxwell's dwindling personal resources, operating in a system designed to maintain educational inequities rather than resolve them. But now the threat was more direct. Blake wasn't content to let their experiment play out and potentially fail on its own. He wanted to control it, reshape it, or destroy it entirely. Why does he care so much? Lily wondered aloud, pushing her tea aside. "We're hardly a threat to MaxTech." Maxwell considered the question. He had known Blake for years, had worked alongside him, had observed his relentless ambition and unwavering belief in market supremacy. It's not about the center itself, Maxwell realized. It's about the idea it represents. If we succeed, if we prove that education can be both accessible and excellent, that technology can serve human development rather than just generate profit, it challenges everything Blake believes about how the world should work. So this is ideological for him. In a way, Blake believes that market incentives are the only reliable drivers of innovation and quality. Our model suggests otherwise, that purpose and human potential can be more powerful motivators than profit margins. Lily's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, then showed Maxwell the screen. An email from Victoria Chen requesting another meeting, this time without her team. Just the three of them. "What do you think?" Lily asked. Maxwell considered their options, limited as they were. "I think we need to know where she stands. If she's complicit with Blake, we need to walk away from her investment, whatever the cost. If she's being used, she deserves to know. And if we're wrong about all of this, if we're just being paranoid?" Maxwell smiled grimly. "Then we'll apologize for wasting her time. But somehow, I don't think we are." The coffee shop had emptied around them, the evening crowd thinning as closing time approached. Through the window, Maxwell could see the city continuing its relentless rhythm. People hurrying home, lights blinking on in apartments, the machinery of commerce gradually winding down for the night. A barista began wiping nearby tables, a gentle hint that the shop would be closing soon. Maxwell checked his watch, nearly 9 o'clock. "We should respond to Chen's request," he said. "Suggest meeting somewhere neutral, not at the center." Lily nodded, already typing a reply on her phone. "Tomorrow morning, the Botanical Garden Cafe? Public enough to be safe, private enough to talk freely." Perfect. As Lily finished the message, Maxwell found himself studying her, the focused intensity that had first caught his attention under the bridge, the unwavering commitment to her students that had initially challenged and then transformed his own priorities. In another life, they might never have crossed paths. Now he couldn't imagine building this new reality without her partnership. "Sent," she said, looking up to find him watching her. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of their shared purpose that had gradually evolved into something more complex. Somewhere across town, Jonathan Blake was likely in his penthouse office, moving pieces on the chessboard, confident in his eventual victory. He had resources, connections, and the weight of the status quo on his side. But Maxwell and Lily had something Blake couldn't comprehend. A purpose beyond personal gain, and a community that had formed around that purpose. The children and families who depended on the Learning Center weren't just beneficiaries. They were partners in building something new. "We should head back," Lily said, gathering her things. "Darius is staying late to work on his project for the science fair. I told him we wouldn't be long." As they walked through the darkening streets, Maxwell felt a strange calm settling over him. The path forward wasn't clear, but the stakes were. Whatever Blake's next move might be, they would meet it not from fear, but from the certainty that their work mattered too much to abandon. The city around them pulsed with contrasts. Wealth and poverty, opportunity and exclusion, all existing in uneasy proximity. It was these very contradictions that had sparked their unlikely collaboration. A teacher from beneath a bridge and a tech mogul seeking redemption, finding common cause in the belief that things could be different. "Do you ever regret it?" Lily asked suddenly. "Walking away from everything, You built? Maxwell considered the question seriously. There are moments when I miss the simplicity of my old life. Problems had clear solutions: market share, product development, competitive strategy. The metrics for success were unambiguous. And now? Now everything is messier. Progress is harder to measure. Change happens in small increments rather than disruptive leaps. He smiled, surprising himself with the genuine contentment he felt. But no, I don't regret it. Not for a second. They turned the corner, and the learning center came into view. Even at this hour, lights glowed in several windows. The building had become a beacon in the community, a place where learning wasn't confined to traditional hours or approaches. Through the window of the robotics lab, they could see Darius hunched over his creation, making minute adjustments with complete absorption. The boy who had once been invisible to the systems meant to serve him was now building something that might someday change those very systems. That's why we fight, Lily said softly, following Maxwell's gaze. He nodded, understanding completely. That's why we'll win. Inside, unaware of the forces gathering against the sanctuary that had given him purpose and belonging, Darius continued his work, creating, failing, learning, and creating again. The cycle that Maxwell had once applied to market dominance and profit margins now served a different master. Human potential unleashed and unbound by artificial constraints. And in that simple act of creation, there was a power that all of Blake's wealth and influence could never match. As they entered the building, Maxwell's phone chimed with Chen's response, confirming their meeting for tomorrow. Whatever came next, whether ally or adversary, they would face it together, grounded in the community they had built and the vision they continued to pursue. The center's security system recognized them, doors unlocking automatically. Lily headed toward the robotics lab to check on Darius, while Maxwell paused in the main hallway, taking in the evidence of the day's activities. Student projects displayed on walls, notes on whiteboards, the organized chaos of genuine learning. He thought of Blake's offer to Lily, the attempted infiltration through Chen's investment team, the legal maneuvers to freeze his assets. Their opponent was resourceful and determined, wielding the very systems Maxwell had once navigated so successfully. But Blake had miscalculated in one crucial respect. He believed this was still about Maxwell Pierce, about ego and legacy and personal vindication. He couldn't comprehend that Maxwell had found something far more valuable than the empire he'd left behind. A purpose that transcended individual achievement. A community bound by shared vision rather than financial incentives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new strategic decisions, new paths to navigate. But tonight, watching Lily help Darius troubleshoot his robot's motion sensors, Maxwell felt an unshakable certainty that they were building something that would outlast whatever obstacles Blake might place in their way. Not because they were smarter or wealthier or more powerful, but because they were pursuing something true. A vision of education that honored the full humanity of every child, that recognized potential where others saw only deficiency, that insisted on possibility in a world too often defined by limitation. And that, Maxwell was beginning to understand, was a force that even Jonathan Blake, with all his resources and ruthless determination, would ultimately be unable to defeat.